So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. Here's Thomas Frank.
Thomas Frank, welcome. So good to see you. I have to say, your book's probably the most influential in my political thinking and development. So all of the things that I'm wrong about, it's your fault. People can just straight up blame you.
Well, I was going to say thank you. That's very kind of you. But with that caveat, I don't know about that.
I mean, Krystil and I are actually, this is what I was just about to tell you. Krystil and I are probably two of like 6 people total in the country who actually gladly use the label populist to describe ourselves. You know? Like, I feel like, I'm just going to jump right into it and ask him a question because this is on the top of my mind. How do you respond to now the word populist is used in like a smear way where they try to equate like Bernie and Trump and say they're both populists?
It's very useful in that sense.
Right.
Yeah,
Populism
but like, what do you make of it being a
fascism.
smear now? Whereas previously, you know, obviously you know the history of populism better than anybody. Like when previously it wasn't a smear at all. Now it's viewed with a negative connotation in elite circles. What do you make of that?
It's come and gone for a long time, but I want to just throw an amusing fact out there. Barack Obama referred to himself as a populist.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
It was towards the end of his presidency. It might even have been in 2016, and then he was at a press conference in Canada that he did this, and he said, you know, a lot of the things that he also referred to Bernie as a populist. He said you should stop using the word populist to describe Trump. Trump is not a populist.
Use it for Bernie.
Bernie is a populist. A lot of the things that I did were populist, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A few months later, he was using it the same as everybody else does. Populism means, you know, mob rule, means these, you know, crazy, paranoid, you know, Trump supporters, that kind of thing. So even he gave up on it right away. The last president to use that word to describe himself before Obama was Jimmy Carter.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't
and
know
Carter
that
was Carter used it in a positive way. Carter, but it was, he meant it as in this really vague, like up with people kind of thing. Like, I like people.
In an Oprah Winfrey kind of way, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But this is also, I mean, one of the things that you track in your new book is that this is an intentional strategy to smear the idea that ordinary people should have any say in our government.
Yes.
And to make the idea of populism a sort of evil and unqualified, unmitigated bad thing is actually an intentional strategy.
Yes. Or with a lot of these people, you know, I don't want to sound like it's a conspiracy. These are intellectuals, and this word is floating around in the ether in intellectual life. Like these are political scientists, politicians, that kind of thing. And they hear the word and they start using it in that way, and everybody else is using it in that way. So why not? Because it gets the job done. But it's not like they've actually thought it through. That's my job. And I wanted to trace how the word went from being this sort of wonderful thing, you know, this great movement, to being this dreadful, awful thing that we deplore and fear and hate. And the first thing you discover is that a lot of people hated populism at the time. I mean, the people who invented the word uppercase P, populism. And despite what people will tell you, it is an American word. It was made up by people from Kansas, by people from my home state. The word was made up one day in 1891 in order to describe a brand new political party, the last great third party movement. And this was, if you're a liberal or a left-winger today, you'd look back at this movement, at populism, and you'd say, wow, those are some people who were really ahead of their time. They were calling for all kinds of government regulation of the economy. They were calling for an income tax. They were calling for votes for women. And they were one of the very first, if not, I think the first ever, to say that the black and white working classes should get together because their interests are the same. Rather, you know, overcome what divides them and get together on these. And this is real. They were way ahead of their time.
So would you say that the label is maybe somewhat interchangeable with like social democrat? What's the closest tradition to populism?
Basically, from today's vantage point, sure, why not? So look, people at the time argued about this, and historians in like the 1930s argued about and they would split hairs about different left-wing factions and tendencies. But look, nowadays, you know, we live in a world where there basically is no left, so it's fine with me, yeah. And there's also, you know, populism did call for some socialist things. They wanted to nationalize the railroads, nationalize the telegraph, the telephones, that kind of thing.
Were they for democratic control of companies or no?
They
Or is
they
that
were
a bridge too far?
That I don't know about. They were extremely hostile to monopolies.
Okay.
So, but they wanted government to break up monopolies in various ways, and. But I don't know about anything further than that. Now, the socialists at the time and socialists in the 1930s would say, yes, but they were a movement of predominantly of farmers. Farmers, especially in a place like Kansas, are landowners. They usually or they often own the land that they were farming on. So therefore, they're not a real socialist movement. But look, they come up at the same time as the Labour Party in England. They identify with the Labour Party in England. They identify with the Labour Party in Australia, Social Democrats in Germany. It's basically all part of the same global movement. What's funny is that we're the only one of those countries that doesn't have a real left party, because this was it, and they died.
So
they got killed.
So what happened to the movement? Was it just like absorbed into the broader Democratic Party, and then the Democratic Party took the neoliberal turn with Bill Clinton? Is that what happened, more or less?
Yeah, it's a long story, but yes, basically the Democratic Party absorbed them in 1896 with a very watered down version of of what the populists were demanding.
It's very democratic of them. That's exactly what they do.
They're still playing that game.
Exactly.
But it worked, and the populists they got on board with the Democratic train. This is William Jennings Bryan was the Democratic candidate. He lost, to their great surprise, because everybody thought, he's this man of destiny, this incredible orator, and he lost. And then the populists go to fighting with one another. Lots of sectarian infighting.
The left infighting?
Yeah,
I've never heard of this.
Yeah. And that's the end of them. And so they basically go back to the parties that they originally came from. Some of them go over to the very brand new American Socialist Party, like Eugene Debs, who was a populist. He signs up with that. And that's by the way, that's the reason that if you ever study the history of the socialist movement in America, don't know why you do that, but it's kind of interesting. They were very strong in Oklahoma. It was their best state.
Really?
Yeah.
So interesting.
It's because of populism, because they inherited the populist message.
And so in terms of, this was one of the few times in American history where you really had a black and white multiracial working class coming together and having some success.
Well, trying to come together. It didn't work out really.
So what happened there? Because I think that also has a lot of relevance to today, and we can talk about that.
Oh yeah, it's on the one hand, a hopeful story, and on the other, a disastrous story. Hopeful because it was the first time and one of the only times that a political party has. Look, we do this routinely nowadays. The Democrats routinely go to, are able to bring together black workers and white workers. Well, I shouldn't take too much for granted. They try to. The populists were the first to do this, and in the 1890s, this was extremely shocking. And by the way, they were upfront about this. They were right out in the open about it. They said, the interests of black farmers and white farmers are identical. They should be voting for the same candidates, and they should get reforms that help them both out. And they did act on it in some places, and they triggered an extraordinary backlash, just unbelievable. The South at the time was dominated by one party. It was the Democrats. Back then, they were openly racist.
Yeah, the Dixiecrats, sure.
Well, they called them the Bourbon Democrats at the time. Dixiecrats is a later. It doesn't really matter.
Right. No, I got you.
By the way, just an aside here. The other day, I was reading. I forget what mainstream publication, but the article started off, the ancient Greeks detested populism. They're talking about the riot in the Capitol. Now we know why the ancient Greeks hated populism. No, the ancient Greeks actually did not have that word. It didn't come along until 1891.
Everything I don't like is populism, said the elite publication.
I think it was the New York Times, but it might have been the Washington Post that called Emperor Caligula a populist. I know.
What?
It's just like
every terrible world leader I've seen described as a populist. Duterte's one they love to call a populist.
Yep.
Anybody who's loud, they're just like, it's populism.
Yeah. Anyhow, so they go to the South with this appeal. They say, black farmers and white farmers should get together. There was a whole there was a whole part of the movement that historians called the black populists who were on board with this party, et cetera. And this triggered this incredible beatdown from the ruling class of the South,
the planter
Bourbon
class.
Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they own the place, and they are propped up by this doctrine of what they used to call white solidarity, the idea being that what your interest as a white person is paramount to anything else, and white people have to stick together and have to vote for the white party, being the Democrats, of course, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they came down on populism like a ton of bricks. First, they cheated them. You know, vote fraud was very common in those days. I don't know about today, but back then it was a really ordinary maneuver. First they did that, and then they just crushed them with this incredible racist campaign. And there's one southern state where the populists did manage to win. It was North Carolina. They got together with the local Republican Party, which was the traditional party of African American voters at the time, and they won. And they controlled the state legislature, had a U.S. senator, had a governor. And when they controlled the state legislature, they enacted various home rule measures. So all of a sudden in North Carolina in the 1890s, in the areas where blacks were in the majority, or just there were a lot of them, they could elect aldermen, they could elect mayors, and they could do all these things all of a sudden. Okay, so the local Democratic Party goes, am I allowed to curse?
Yep.
Yes.
They go absolutely apeshit. And they pull out the biggest weapon they know of, which is racial panic, racial fear-mongering. And they unleash this on populism and on the Republicans who had come together. They called this movement fusionism because they had fused together. And they called this, what the Democrats did to them, they called it the white supremacy campaign. And they weren't just fooling around, just like that was their own name for themselves.
Right. They were out front about
campaign. Yeah. And they this hysterical campaign of fear against populism and the Republican, the fusionists.
Wow.
And they won. In 1898, the election of 1898, they finally beat these guys. And as soon as they did it, they disenfranchised black voters and a whole lot of poor whites. And by the way, they did this all across the South. Up until that point in Southern history, in most Southern states, blacks were still allowed to vote. But once populism came along, it showed the sort of ruling class of the South, this is really dangerous.
Was a flex of the
vote.
muscle.
And they weaponized race.
Yes.
For class ends.
Yeah, of course.
Which is actually...
this was absolutely a class conflict.
Right.
This is breaking out all over America. This is the original class conflict in our society. And it involves farmers and industrial workers versus the owners. Whether we're talking about Southern planters or Northern bankers or the Vanderbilt family that owns railroads, et cetera. This is the original class conflict. And they weaponized race to smash the party of farmers and of working people. And they did it. And then they disenfranchised a huge... And in some places it actually got worse. This is extremely relevant right now. In one city in North Carolina, when this was done, they actually had a military coup. Do you know about this?
No.
It's the only successful coup in American history, if you discount the Civil War, if you put the Civil War aside. They'd beaten the populists and the Republicans, were called the fusionists. And in this one town, Wilmington, North Carolina, the local Democrats went further. And they got guns, and they went marching through the black part of town, shooting people indiscriminately, burning down buildings, chasing people out. They threatened to. The city's mayor was a Republican. They got rid of him. The city's police chief was a populist. They got rid of him. They threatened to lynch all these people.
Holy cow!
Yeah, it's
wild.
I didn't even know this story until a few years ago, and it is fascinating to me that and by the way, nothing happened to them. They threw out the mayor and the leader of the mob, the Democrat Party mob, installed himself as mayor. Yes, and nothing happened to him.
Oh my God!
It worked. It was successful.
You don't.
Wow.
When people think of the U.S., they don't think of
that story.
Yeah.
Well, and it is we still can't talk about that story straight.
I mean, we just barely are talking about Black Wall Street, right? The burning down of that. Like, I just learned about that recently, and I'm in politics 24/7.
I only found out about this. I thought I knew about populism. I didn't know this story. I only found out about it a little while ago, because until very recently, it was referred to as the Wilmington race riot.
Oh, like it was both sides.
Yeah.
Right,
Everybody
Classic
did
propaganda.
Everyone did some things, and they all regretted it.
White mob of former Confederate soldiers marching through the black part of town, shooting and burning. And and we still, by the way, and now we're in this period where people do talk about these things more openly, but they still can't tell the story right because one of the victims is populism. And they can't. That just bursts people's brains when they think that, wait, populism wasn't the mob?
Right.
So wait a minute.
Populism was the victim of the white supremacist
so
mob.
What? Let me ask you this question, because this is definitely relevant to this story. One of my biggest fears today is that you can basically have the class conflict that's very clear in society. I feel like there's this interchangeable thing that happens, and the media certainly plays into this, that it's almost like cultural grievances are just swapped for class grievances. And then there's like the supremacy of the cultural grievance. And what I'm worried about is, unless we're relentlessly focusing on class.
I remember somebody wrote a book about this.
But my question is, what if the worst case scenario is true, which is like they could just always kind of quash the class grievances by just pivoting to the culture war? That's my question. And I feel like that's the nightmare that we're in right now.
Yeah, in some ways it is. And well, that was it. Look, I tried to write the history. So the populists they deliberately avoided the culture war issues of their day. The main one being prohibition.
Right.
Of alcohol, for those of you who don't know the history of this part of American life, but they deliberately didn't talk. They never talked about this because it was so divisive, and it would have fractured their following,
their coalition, sure.
And eventually they did. They lost anyway for reasons that we just described, and then a bunch of other things that happened to them. But populist movements, some of them have been extremely successful. You think about the 1930s, the labor movement, the cultural populism of that period, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the New Deal, overwhelmingly successful. But then at other times, it's been very, not easy, but it's been possible to short circuit when people try to build movements that bring working class people together. It's turned out to be relatively easy to short circuit those. Look, this is the story of what's the matter with Kansas, is that these class grievances are buried under a mountain of culture war crap.
Yes.
And and this is what I discovered when I started writing that book. I was like, this is a long time ago now. I was drawn down there by the state's war on the theory of evolution, which was just so bizarre. Right. I couldn't believe it was happening.
Yeah.
And then I interviewed all the leaders of the sort of conservative movement there, and they were all deep in the culture wars. The culture wars were all they cared about. And what I eventually discovered was that every single one of the culture war battles was expressed in terms of class grievance. Every single one is about you, the honest, hardworking American citizen, versus this shadowy elite on the two coasts who are trying to tell you what to think. These Hollywood people, these New York people that are telling you what.
It's a brilliant bait and switch if you think about it.
Trying to tell you how to live.
It's truly brilliant.
It is brilliant. I don't know if it's done deliberately. I don't think it is. I think these things manifest. I mean, there are some geniuses behind it all, right? We think back to the Nixon days.
Right.
Spiro Agnew. This was, the people who were behind, like Kevin Phillips, Pat Buchanan. These guys are really good at the game. Who wrote Spiro Agnew's speeches for him? But you see it all there in miniature. This is transforming class animosity into culture war.
Yeah.
They were very good at it, and it's still with us. I mean, it's everywhere today.
So
it's all around us.
How do you see the events of last week then, and how does that fit into populism, the history of populism, anti-populism? What's your view?
Okay, next question. Look, what can I say that hasn't been said? It's absolutely, it's terrifying. It's atrocious. It's not populism. Populism does not mean mob rule. It doesn't mean demagoguery.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean Donald Trump.
Well, he's a successful fake populist, I'd say. He's like the ultimate fake populist, right?
There's a kind of there is a kind of phony populism.
Yeah.
That's what I was just talking about, where you capture people's class anger.
Grievance.
Yes.
Yeah, they're and which is a legitimate grievance
Yes.
in my
Yes.
view.
Mhm.
Right.
But you capture that with these other tools. But God, those people on the Capitol are the people who ransacked the Capitol. That there have been now a couple of efforts to interview a bunch of them and see what their causes are, what they think. Other than we know what their main cause was, right? They want Donald Trump to continue being
Right.
president. They think he won the election,
Right.
And
really think that.
Yeah,
Like, really
I know.
believe
I know,
it.
isn't that?
Well,
Yeah.
this
It-
is
wait, but here's the bottom line is that they appear to me to just be there. Some of them we know what they're like. If you're carrying a Confederate flag, we know what you believe in.
Right.
yeah.
You're making it really super plain there.
But what about the guys carrying South Vietnam flags? What the hell's up with that?
Well,
did you see that?
No, I didn't.
Krystil and I were talking about this the other day, and there's like dueling narratives going on now because some people, like Professor Richard Wolff, for example, who I love and who eventually we'll have on this show and everything, he's making the argument that, like, actually, yes, the economic grievances are driving a large number of the people who were at Capitol Hill that day. So there is an argument for, like,
Oh, wait, Kyle, I want to interrupt here a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've spent a lot of time with these kind of protesters. Remember, I used to write about the Tea Party movement. Republicans, Trump supporters aren't just working class people.
well,
Right.
that was what I was going to get to. I was going to say that the other argument is some of the people who were there were CEOs.
Yeah, there
some
are a lot
women.
of- I would
one
say-
woman flew in on a private jet.
Right.
So it's a mix. It's
I
messy.
would
Is
say
my,
that
is my point.
Of course.
Yeah.
And they're all over the map. They come from all over the country. They had to travel a long way. So when I used to hang around with the Tea Party people, these were small business people.
Right.
Now they did something very interesting, which was to try to capture. It was a performance. They were trying to. This was 2009, 2010. So we're in the Great Recession. The economy has collapsed. Wall Street has done these things where everybody's angry. Remember, and we bailed them out.
Bailed them out.
And they've committed open,
Bonuses.
obvious fraud,
Yeah.
right? And nothing's happening to them. And these people get together and manage to capture public anger about it. It was kind of a genius move, but it wasn't working class people at those rallies. These were small business people, a lot of lobbyists, actually.
Yeah.
Chomsky said the anger is real, but yes, there's an astroturf element to it, where it is some people who are kind of steering the movement who are pretty well off.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is, like, it's a messy situation. There's no clean, neat narrative that
so
fits
there
it.
is no great sociological breakdown of it. And I would caution anybody, against saying that this was some kind of
pure
of
working class revolt. Yeah,
protest.
Right.
sure.
I've been at a lot of strikes. Those are working class
Yes.
Yes,
protests.
absolutely.
Well, and what I have seen that has been worrisome is, and it actually ties into painting everybody there as a working class person, is then people who want to consolidate elite control use this image to say, this is what populism is. We
Yes,
can't have this. We can't have these people. These people are crazy, right? They're ransacking the camp. They believe in utter insanities and delusions. They worship this crazy maniacal guy. Like, we can't let these people run anything. And then that's used to quash legitimate majoritarian populist movements.
And wait, I want to point out another sort of shocking aspect of this, that it's largely Democrats that are saying that.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is the putative party of the people, the political party founded by Thomas Jefferson, that has totally lost its faith in ordinary Americans and denounces them all the time, wants to control them, wants to censor what they, and
It's the core of what they do now and what they stand for.
Yeah, what they want to censor what we see and read. They want us to. I mean, I was just reading some asshole today was saying people need to. They need to swear that they'll wear a mask or something before we'll give them.
Yes, I saw that
benefits.
on Twitter.
That was Kyle, actually.
Was it?
No.
It's like that's Look, there's a larger historical issue going on here that these riots. By the way, and I don't want to downplay the importance of this. I've studied fascism and I've studied right-wing terrorism. In the 1970s, when I was a kid, it was around, not in this country, but like in Italy and Spain and other places, South Africa. And this could be the beginning of something really dreadful. I mean, not too many. I mean, only a handful of people got killed during this, which is amazing. If
Right.
you ask
That
me.
anybody got killed, that they got inside the Capitol, right?
I still can't. That still
Well, I think
boggles
it's-
the mind. But
I
we'll
think
talk
it's
about
'cause
that.
the
I'm not an
cops-
expert on this stuff. And
Yeah.
I wasn't there, and I haven't read. Anyhow, the thing is, this could be the beginning of something really awful, and I don't want to brush it off, and I don't want to diminish the significance of it. This could be the start of something really, really, really bad. But it also could be the last gasp of Trumpism.
Well, I was going to say, so do you see, like, so we have Biden, and then do you see, like, a more competent demagogue like Cruz or Hawley winning in 2024? Is that the fear?
Yeah, those guys might be done for. But look, Trumpism is not going away.
Right.
Everything that we've just described,
Yeah.
the substituting of cultural grievances for economic ones.
Right.
And then Trump added to that. Remember, Trump actually did talk about
I'm not going to
some
cut your Social
economic
Security. We got to
Yes.
stop outsourcing the jobs. No
Yes,
more outsourcing. NAFTA was the
exactly.
worst trade deal ever signed. Yeah, of course.
No, then he didn't do.
Didn't do anything. Yeah.
I was about to
There
say.
was
I was
net
about to say
outsourcing.
jack shit, but I keep forgetting that the FCC might not like that. What the hell? Nobody gives a damn
No.
anymore.
You can say whatever you want, Thomas.
Yeah, whatever you
It's
want.
so funny. But when I was young, you had to be very careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You okay?
Back
I
certain.
threw my back out. I was, yeah.
You want
the
a
other
cushion or
day.
something?
No, I'm
Okay.
fine. I just
You're okay?
I've got to sit
Okay.
A certain way.
perfectly
Gotcha.
still. No gestures.
I've
even.
done that, and it's horrible. So what does all of this mean?
But wait, there was a question that I was of yours that I was going to get back to, which is
Okay.
this broader problem of this mistrust of ordinary Americans that
Right.
you see, and Republicans have said things like that forever. What disturbs me is that it's now in the Democratic Party, that the Democratic Party has come to identify itself with credentialed expertise,
Hierarchy.
with hierarchy, the people at the top, with the elite. I mean, let's use the word, with the elite in a way that I've never seen before, and that is really disturbing. And that's not how. I mean, you can try running a left-wing movement that way, or a party of the left that way, and maybe that will succeed. But it's not going to be a party that does any of the things that I'm interested in doing.
Right. It's
And this is the story of our times. Is Trumpism is a reaction to that in some ways.
right.
Yes.
But what burns me up all the time is that you've got one party that is this pseudo-populist, fake class-based uprisings and appeals to people whose lives really are being destroyed.
Right.
You just drive through any small town outside of one of the big cities. I just drove through upstate New York yesterday.
Yeah.
I was driving through Vermont and stuff. And when you're outside of the fancy ski resorts and the big cities and all that, these people's lives are being destroyed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have a right to be pissed off. So Trump appeals to them in this really awful way. And the Democrats turn up, which is ordinarily the party that would be speaking to them and trying to do something about their situation. The Democrats turn up their noses at them
Yeah.
and shake their fingers at them, scold them. And they've become a kind of, the term that I use in my new book is that a certain kind of liberal inhabits a utopia of scolding. And I'll unpack that if you want, but it's like, I don't want to go on too long because I know you have another question.
No,
and I
keep
have
going.
a problem with I just talk too much.
No, we like it.
It's
Go.
because you have
Please,
a lot to
go
say.
on.
Go ahead.
So what we're seeing in this country is, okay, so not only are they sort of, I always used to say there's two hierarchies in America. There's one hierarchy of money, corporate power, and there's a hierarchy of credentials, of expertise, of the professional elite, people whose affluence is
I went to
based-
the right schools.
Yeah, is based on their
Right,
achievements
yeah.
in school.
Yeah.
But no, they have we're here in a building named for a very famous professional association. Lawyers, doctors,
Cultural
academics.
power,
Yeah,
too.
well, it comes from their achievements in school, from
Right.
credentialed expertise, and they are an elite just as much as the hierarchy of money. Silicon Valley, Wall Street, etc. What's really alarming is right now, those two elites are coming together. Okay, this is something I've never seen before in my lifetime. So it used to be that the corporate elite was on the Republican side, and the sort of credentialed elite of professional elite was on the Democratic side. And we're in a situation now where they are uniting, and that is disturbing. It's disturbing if you're on the left, because the situation that I've just described.
There's no workers'
who's
party.
left out? Yeah.
There's no workers' party.
What's missing from this picture?
Yeah.
Us.
Well, and what does that mean? What does that portend for the future of a stable society if you have two parties of the elites and no mass popular expression? Nobody is representing the interest of the workers.
Incredibly
no union representation either.
That's right.
And that used to be the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Right.
Look, that is a great question, and the way I like to put it, and I think of this as the theme of my entire life as a writer, is what happens to a middle-class society like the one I was born into. What happens to a middle-class society when you no longer have a party of the traditional left, when that is gone, when that is removed from the equation, which happened in this country? That's Clintonism. I mean, that's Carter in some ways, but that's the Democratic Party has said openly, we're not interested in being that party anymore. We don't want to be the party of organized labor. We don't want to be we don't want to be the party of poor people. We don't want to be, they're not interested in that. They're interested in something else. We can talk about that something else later. But what happens when, the party of the left gives up on its traditional role? And as far as I know, we're one of the only. Well, it's happening all over the world, but we're way ahead of everyone else.
Yeah.
So what happens to a society like the one I was born in 1965? You had a very broad distribution of wealth, at least in the northern states, especially for white people, but also for a lot of black people as well. America was basically a social democracy.
Right.
And not in the South, of course, but in like where I grew up, there was not a huge divide between the rich and the poor, or the rich and the sort of blue collar working people. Well, what happens when the party of the left gives up on that? Well, two things. First of all, that's all gone to hell. You have incredible inequality. And the statistics from this are COVID. That what is it? The Jeff Bezos. Now the richest man in the world, his wealth increases by some incredible amount every day. He owns our newspaper.
60% of small businesses that shut are permanently shut.
I believe the stat was he could have given every single Amazon worker a $125,000 bonus and still have made money during the crisis.
Wow. Yeah. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, but it just gets worse, and it was already extremely bad before any of this began. I used to, we've been talking about this for a long time. But it just gets worse and worse and worse. That's one thing that happens. And the other thing that happens is Trumpism, is that you have these demagogic right-wing, the Republican Party is now looking around for ways to get elected. And you'd have to be, a complete political dunce not to see that this spells opportunity.
Right.
Look, the Democrats have, and by the way, Nixon could see this back in '68. The Democrats are abandoning their the people that they've been identified with forever. They're abandoning them. You'd have to be, it would be political malpractice for them not to reach out and try to win these voters over in some way. And that's precisely what they've done for 40 years now.
Yeah.
And they have succeeded at it. It's absolutely maddening. But what it is it's a recipe for disaster.
I learned something very interesting that you taught me today. I didn't know that 85% of newspapers, roughly 85% of newspapers, were anti-FDR. And so what I took away from that fact is that it wasn't just the corporate elite and the moneyed interests who were lined up against him. It was also the cultural elite that were lined up against him.
Yes.
So that triggered the thought for me that in some ways FDR was like a left Trump, right? But who actually meant it. He was a real populist. Yes, he was a real populist, right? But so my question for you is, because we do have some lawmakers today who are elected who took no corporate PAC money, took no big money, only raised through small dollar donations. Nominally, in terms of what they believe in, it's a social democratic agenda. So they check all the boxes on that stuff. But one of the problems that I see from them is that they're terrified to actually lean into having the media hate them. And they're terrified to lean into sort of like the cultural battle here. They'd rather align with the cultural elites as opposed to be opposed to the cultural elites. So if you have a left that sort of leans into that battle with the media, do you think that would yield better results? And can you get like a left Trump who actually succeeds on some of these things?
Well, the answer is yes, you could, but they don't want to do that. That's the memory of the 1930s is so distant. It's so forgotten.
Right. Yeah.
That whenever I remind people of it, they're like you. They didn't know it. They're shocked.
No idea.
So just to fill in the to tell the whole story. So Roosevelt was elected in 32, the deepest level days of the Depression. The day he was inaugurated, all the banks in America were closed, for example. Yeah, it was a complete economic catastrophe. And nobody really knew in 32 what he meant by New Deal. Sometimes he would spell it out, but it was fairly vague. And so a lot of the American elite was with Roosevelt in 32. By 1936, they know what he means by it. It means he's going to break up the banks. He's going to regulate the remaining banks. He's going to set up the Securities and Exchange Commission. He's going to be breaking up monopolies. He's going to, he's going to have programs giving jobs to unemployed people. He's going to be raising wages all over the place. Unions are forming. It's like it is doomsday for capitalism, right? So by 1936, they know what this guy is up to. And the election of 1936, the American elite came together against him in this incredible way. And when I say the American elite, I mean all of them. I mean, not just the rich, like the DuPont family, the richest family in America, who bankrolled the first great right-wing front group. They were called the American Liberty League. They had more money than the Republican Party that year.
Wow.
Yeah. But so the rich were with the Republicans. The newspapers of America, like you said, 85% of them, an estimated 85% of them were against Roosevelt, and they denounced him in the most extreme kind of way. It is reminiscent of the anti-Trump feel, like how at any time during the last 4 years, you could open up the Washington Post and there'd be 8 op-eds denouncing Trump. And nothing else.
Yep.
Everything else in the world is ignored.
Yes.
Well, it was like that in 36 against Roosevelt, just constantly. The Chicago Tribune, which was one of the biggest papers in America at the time, would denounce him on page one, these page one political cartoons. I mean, the most extreme kind of rhetoric, calling him a communist, calling him a subversive, all of this. On and on and on. But the sort of professional elites of America were against him, the lawyers, the American Bar Association, all these guys, the preachers of America. I'm leaving, economists.
Right,
they hated him. But I'm talking about orthodox economists here, Harvard, MIT, the people who are in charge of the profession.
Yeah.
Roosevelt had his own economic advisors, people like John Kenneth Galbraith, who are really, really outside of the mainstream. And they were trying all kinds of new things. But orthodox economics, along with all the other professions, they absolutely hated this guy. And they came together against him in this extraordinary way. And Roosevelt proceeded to win in one of the biggest landslides of all time.
Wow. You said it made the people like him more, right?
Yeah, you said leaning into it. That's exactly what he did.
Yes.
He would go on the radio and he would talk about this, that they all hate me.
That's so gangster.
He called them. He had a term for them. He called them economic royalists.
Oh, that's
which is so great, right? And he said, I welcome their hatred.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful, and he just wailed on them. But he also had the radio, so he had that wonderful voice, and he could go on the radio and be very reassuring. And the public loved him. And there was not really a study by our modern day standards, but somebody at the time went back and read all the newspaper coverage and said that back then cities used to have more than one newspaper. And they said that even in cities where all of the papers were against Roosevelt, those were the cities where he did best.
Oh, my God. That is so awesome.
Which indicated that not only did people like Roosevelt, but they hated the media so much.
Yes.
Which they still
Just
do.
like today. Exactly.
There was actually, this history I had no idea of either. There was actually a piece in the Washington Post about how business leaders and elites tried to foment an actual armed coup.
Right. So I didn't talk about that in the book because the evidence for that is very poor. But it's captured the imagination, and people talk about it all the time. This was I forget who it was. It was a guy it was some Wall Street broker, and he had been. It's actually kind of an interesting story. He had been on vacation in Europe. And he'd been hanging around with some guys in Italy, and he'd been learning.
Picking picking up some tricks
and
and
some
techniques.
guys in France, and he had learned all about this great thing called fascism. And he came back to America. So we only know little bits and pieces of it. We don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
But he came back to America and evidently tried to encourage some of his other business friends to mount a fascist coup. Okay. Now this never got anywhere. It was apparently, as far as we know, it was one guy, sort of like
Cooking this up.
Yeah, dreaming this up on his own in his spare time. The stuff that I'm describing, like the American Liberty League, this was real. This was real, and they were giving speeches all over America, and they were issuing pamphlets, and they were on the radio all the time, and they were doing black tie banquets here in D.C. where the owner of the Washington Post would be there, and some exiled royalty from Europe would be there, and what killed these guys is that. The American Liberty League is that they were totally upfront about their elitism. About it's like we represent America's best people.
That's sort of like the Democrats, though, now.
You, meaning the voters, have to learn to stay in your place.
Right.
And what is just absolutely blows your mind when you go back and dig through the original materials from the 30s is they were right up front about this. They would talk about eugenics.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. They're like, well, the reason you are in the working class and I am here at this fancy resort speaking to my fellow professional attorneys is because, I'm the result of good breeding.
Oh,
and you are down there because your ancestors are like a bunch of fuck-ups.
Today's liberals stop a step short of that. They don't quite go that far.
But they were open about this. They would publish this stuff. And can you imagine trying to make a political sale by denouncing ordinary people?
Right.
It's like, it's so stupid. It boggles the imagination. But they lost. We never learned that lesson, though.
Yeah.
And we are right back to that today. I mean, now we do it in slightly more subtle terms, but when you see one of those yard signs.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
And say, respect science. Well, you and I, we've been to college. We know that's not what the scientific method is. It's not a matter of respect.
Yeah. Right.
It's a matter of questioning it, and trying to poke holes in a hypothesis, etc. Testing an idea. That's not what's they're talking about. Respect science means respect credentials, respect me.
Yes.
Right.
Know your place.
Sort of like the deification of Fauci, for example. There's the Democratic, they love him so much. It's so fawning and so over the top. Meanwhile, early on, he said that you shouldn't buy masks.
He outright,
I know. Well, look,
outright lied about it.
One of the things that we all know is experts make mistakes. I make mistakes, and I'm not going to go. I mean, I like Fauci personally. I've never met him or anything, but I like him. But I do have to point this out again and again and again. This is something I'm going to point it out to you, and every time I get a chance, I tell whoever I'm talking to about this. We are living in a time of incredible, cascading elite failures.
That's right.
One after another, after another, after another. Depending on when you want to start with the Iraq War, you want to start with the financial crisis, you can list them. And these are failures by credentialed authorities, by professionals, by people at the very top, bailing each other out, never holding each other accountable, getting us into stupid wars, or look at mismanaging Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. And this one always makes me chuckle because she was advised by the very smartest people in American politics, and they lost to a guy that had never run for office before, whose campaign was managed by Steve Bannon, who had never managed a campaign before.
Right.
And they lost to this guy.
And they learned no lesson from that.
Right. But it goes on and on and on. Elite failure on top of elite failure on top of elite failure. But there's nobody saying, we need to do something about our elites and the way they keep screwing up. There is no sort of program of study for that. There is no handy term for denouncing these people. Instead, it's always about populism. And this goes way beyond the events of last week at the Capitol. This is the last 5 years, both in America and in Europe. All of these intellectuals crying and gnashing their teeth and tearing their hair because the people don't trust them,
the experts
anymore. Yeah, people have lost faith in the experts. And the answer they talk about this all the time, constantly. It's in the newspaper every single day here in Washington. But one answer is off limits to them. Can never be explored, can never be discussed, can never be acknowledged. And that is the possibility that of elite failure.
We fucked up. Yeah.
Right.
No, that can't be the answer.
No.
It's like
gotta
they do it the opposite of the way.
Facebook ads.
Yeah.
It's
Russia.
gotta
Always
be.
Russia.
Wait, how would a scientist approach this? They'd be like, "What's the simplest answer for why people hate elites?"
Occam's razor.
Because elites keep fucking up.
Well, and
but they're
Trump-
they won't use that answer.
Right.
It has to be this really convoluted thing about how everybody is deluded, everybody's
Yep.
been tricked. And
Well, Trump has been an amazing excuse because it's just his fault.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's just his fault.
Yep.
There was no he just popped out of the ether and he magically made everything
Yeah.
horrible.
Who
Nothing
knows
was
where
horrible
these
before. It
ideas
was all
came
going
from?
great. Bush era was amazing. He's a hero,
Yeah.
right? This just
Yeah.
popped out of nowhere.
And I think that's one of the worst things about the time that we're living in is that I came out of academia. I got a PhD some years ago, and they are as enlisted in this culture war now as anybody else. I
Right.
never thought of them that way, but it certainly seems like they are now, and that's singularly disheartening to me.
So let me ask you this. This is a question I've been thinking a lot about. Is it worth it to take head on the myth making and the deification of Democratic figures like Bill Clinton and Obama? Because Bernie's strategy in 2016 and in 2020 was to almost just leave that off the table completely. Like, let's not get into Bill Clinton's legacy. Let's not get into Obama's legacy. Because Obama, for example, has a high approval rating, even though he was very neoliberal, corporatist, standard status quo type president. So do you think it makes sense to take on those sacred cows or no?
Well, speaking as somebody who is, writes books, and what you do when you're a journalist or an intellectual is you try to hold the powerful accountable. Of course you do.
Well, I mean, for politicians running, if you're a left politician running, trying to win,
Is it worth trying to
is
take
it
on
worth
that
trying to
battle?
take on the legacy of Obama to say, actually, no, he did a lot of bad things, like when he bailed out Wall Street and then they gave out bonuses and then they didn't even limit it.
By the way, we're speaking on the morning that Biden just announced his economic plan, or I guess that was last night, and that is itself a sort of repudiation of Obamaism. It's
That's
more
true.
than twice as big as the stimulus that Obama
Right.
proposed, and it's a tacit acceptance of the critique at the time that Obama's stimulus was way too small and too paltry. Whether they say it openly or not, they have to come to terms with that legacy. So I liked Obama, voted for Obama. I was happy with him. The one that burns me up is Clinton and Clintonism, and that is a legacy that they do have to repudiate openly, because that legacy is you think about Clinton's big 5 accomplishments as president. Okay, what were they? I always try to do them in order, but I get it
Welfare
wrong.
reform.
I think-
Welfare reform, the crime bill of '94, bank deregulation, which also telecom
Glass-Steagall,
deregulation.
NAFTA.
NAFTA.
Yeah, of course, the trade agreements, and it wasn't just NAFTA. Remember, he also got PNTR with China.
Right, that's even
which
worse.
was much more disastrous.
And the crime bill.
And then the balanced budget.
Oh, balanced
I did
budget,
the crime
remember,
budget,
yeah.
the crime bill. All 5 of those things were Republican proposals. All 5 of them. Basically, Clinton made the sale for Republican policies. These are things that Reagan wanted, and Reagan negotiated NAFTA.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the Reagan's team negotiated it.
Yeah.
And but
The
they
attacks on
couldn't get it
welfare,
passed.
That was all Reagan.
All of these ideas are Reagan ideas.
Yep.
Deregulating Wall Street, all this. And Clinton got it done in this spectacular way. And that is a legacy that if we don't come to terms with what a disaster that was for the country and for the Democratic Party, then we are lost. And it is ironic to me that as we've gone through this last year of racial reckoning, which I think really needed to happen, that somehow a lot of these Democrats are exempt from that. I mean, it's highly ironic.
Highly ironic.
That Joe Biden was the Democratic nominee in the great year of Black Lives Matter.
No one really talks
he's the
about
author of the '94 crime bill.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And had a hand in a bunch of the earlier ones as well.
Yeah.
And he's the nominee this year. It's like I have a philosophy of 2020. I have a way of looking at it.
What
What's
is
that?
It's kind of vulgar.
That's okay.
You're free to say whatever.
So the Romans thought that the gods were very human, and that the gods like to play with us, like you and I would play chess. The gods would move us around, and the gods would torment us just for the fun of it, just to see how we reacted. And that's 2020. They're just fucking with us.
Yeah.
It feels like it, right?
Like making Bernie drop out right before the pandemic
Oh my
hit.
God.
I know.
So the guy who's proposing universal health care,
That's
you know,
right.
which would have been like an obvious thing once you realize what the pandemic is and what it's going to entail.
So I
and then
wanna-
making Joe Biden the nominee.
And I want to dig in on what you were saying about how his stimulus proposal represents a certain tacit repudiation of Obama. I've been paying attention a little bit this week to Joe Scarborough on Morning Joe, who's like, direct line into elites in Washington. And it's been really interesting because this morning he was on there going like, here's how I argue in favor of universal health care to my conservative friends.
Joe Scarborough?
Joe
Yeah,
Scarborough.
very surprising, I know.
And
He did
making
say
this
it.
case earlier this week, he was making this case about how FDR was right on that we've got to have these reforms in order to save capitalism. Otherwise, this whole thing is going to fall apart. And I'm watching this going, what the hell is going on here?
That is interesting.
Isn't it interesting?
Is he still a Republican, by the way?
I don't know, allegedly.
he's a Biden
Sees
Democrat.
himself as conservative, right? Or at least plays it up that way. But I thought that, and you've seen Biden on embracing $2,000 checks. Now it's $1,400 plus $600, whatever. Embracing $2,000 checks. Embracing a larger, I think, stimulus than we expected, and certainly a lot larger than the Obama era. I mean, do you think that there's any kind of a recognition there that they got to give some scraps to the working class, or else this is going to end badly for them?
Yeah, I look, I don't know, and we all know what it's basically. They've taken everything that's been floating around in the ether here in Washington for the last year and threw it all together into a proposal. And it's great. It's massive. It includes everything, but it's not enough by itself. There's going to have to be a lot more reforms that happen, and we'll see. We'll see whether Biden. So Biden is an interesting guy because. He does identify with unions and with blue-collar people. He likes to tour factories. He likes to speak at union halls.
He's got the affect, but his record is still
very poor.
Clinton-esque.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And and all the excuses people make for him. They're like, well, Biden is he's a party man, and so he does whatever the leadership tells him. And now that he's in the leadership, he gets to do whatever he wants.
The new FDR articles I think are insane. But to Krystil's point,
it would be nice, wouldn't it?
I would love it. Are you kidding me? Prove me
Can
wrong, Joe.
I just want to throw one thing out there. If Biden does it right, if he pulls a Harry Hopkins kind of Harry Hopkins was Roosevelt's advisor, who was able to get relief money out to people with incredible speed, set up the WPA, all this stuff early on in the Roosevelt era. If Biden's able to do something like that and get everybody vaccinated in the first 100 days, get money out to people in the first 100 days, this country will love him.
Oh, are you kidding me? We
bar-
want to love somebody.
the bar
Yeah.
is
It would be so great to have a
Give me
leader.
one
it really
universal
is so
program.
low.
Give me one universal program, and everybody be like, "Oh my God, this is amazing." Put him on Mount Rushmore.
Give him
No,
vaccine out.
exactly. And that's a great opportunity.
It is.
This guy could do it, and
I
he's
hope
got
so.
both houses now. And if he knows how to play the game, and supposedly he does, right? He can do the Lyndon Johnson thing, and twist people's arms,
Fingers
and
crossed.
get people to vote for things that they ordinarily wouldn't vote for. If he's able to do that, he has it in his hands.
Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, I can't. I have a sort of gag reflex when I start to be optimistic about Democrats.
Yeah, no, you
because
can't
I
be.
remember what happened last time.
Expect
the
the worst.
drama
Expect
is
the worst.
coming.
I mean, just Obamacare is a great example of this, right? Like, Obama and the Democrats ended up ultimately proposing the conservative reform because that originally came from the
Romney-care.
Heritage Foundation.
Right.
Exactly, and it was Romney Care.
Yeah.
They
So it's like,
negotiate
It was
with
Bob
themselves.
Dole's,
right.
Bob Dole's alternative to Clinton.
exactly.
healthcare.
Newt Gingrich supported it back in the day. So, like, that's always what I come to expect from the Democrats.
Well, I mean, even on the $2,000 checks is a perfectly illustrative example. Like,
I meant
they ran
$1,400.
on this super clear, like amazingly clear, Facebook ads that literally say, vote for Reverend Warnock and you will get a $2,000 check.
Yeah.
And then
It's
before
like,
they even...
well, you already got 600 of
Yeah.
it.
Before they even take it
A
to
total.
the
We meant a total of
Republicans,
2,000.
They're like, well, I mean, with 14 plus the 600, and if you count in, it's like, no, you have a political winner. You've made a promise.
But wait, they also say, but that's what Trump meant when he proposed it. So we're just doing what Trump.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny when Trump stakes out the left wing of the acceptable?
Yes, exactly.
And that issue was dead until Trump re-injected it back into the conversation. I mean,
gonna
credit to
give
Hawley and Bernie.
By the way,
Yeah,
every time we
credit
say
there,
Trump's name, you have to say that asshole.
that asshole. That's correct. But to your point, Krystil, to the point about Morning Joe, which I think is actually really interesting that he is doing this turn right now.
By the way, he calls himself a populist now.
Oh, what? I didn't hear that.
I swear to God.
Okay.
Trump?
Yeah. Yes, he called. No,
Trump
no.
or Morning Joe?
Morning Joe.
Oh my God, that's the
Calls
craziest thing I've
himself-
ever heard.
I swear to
I
God.
can't believe it either. But anyway, my question based off that is,
I'm sorry if I'm going to make you watch Morning Joe.
It's
Just
all right.
out of curiosity.
You guys have to understand. I don't watch TV anymore. I'm not
That's
invited
smart.
on TV in this country. I'm totally persona non grata in
you and
the
Noam
media in
Chomsky,
this
you're not
country.
allowed on. Yeah.
But it's fine. I don't care. I
You feel
really
better,
don't care. I'm able to do good work. I'm proud of what I do, and they buy my books in Australia, so I'm happy.
I buy your books too. I recommend everybody buys your books. But my question is, do you remember the author who was on Morning Joe or no? Do you remember his name? I don't remember his name. It's okay. It's no big deal. Anyway, this author basically framed FDR's successes as like the thing that saved capitalism, and it was good for capitalism. And so I think that's the framing that kind of triggered Morning Joe to be like,
Yeah.
I like capitalism.
Well,
okay.
that's a classic take on FDR. I think it's kind of a bullshit take.
Okay,
It's something
I was
that
gonna
people
ask you
would
what
say.
you think of it.
I mean, if you asked the capitalists at the time,
They would be like, oh, yeah.
they were like, "This guy's a red.
Right,
Yeah.
He's
exactly.
a commie. He's in league with the Russians, et cetera, et cetera." They did say that.
Yeah. Kurt
And
Anderson,
they didn't
by
think
the
there
way,
was
is
any
the author's
saving
name.
capitalism about it. But people said that in the beginning in the 1950s. You had this new generation. They talk about this in relationship to populism. New generation of historians that came up. They were called the consensus school, and for them, political divisiveness, like you saw in the 1930s, was anathema, and they tried to erase it from American history. And the idea was that all American politicians throughout our history, with a few tiny exceptions, have agreed on everything. And one of the things that they supposedly agree on is capitalism. So therefore, FDR has to be reconfigured as a savior of capitalism.
Oh, interesting.
So, but is there value in that
Interesting.
framing, though, for like normie Americans, or is it largely a negative to do that, to frame it that way?
Oh hell, I'm not. That's not my business.
Okay.
The thing is, it's true in the sense that he saved America from some kind of something worse. So Herbert Hoover is this sort of disastrous president, doesn't do anything sort of like Trump, actually.
Yeah.
He doesn't do anything as the crisis worsens. I mean, you think of Trump over the last year, did jack all about
Literally.
COVID. It's so. By the way, he would have been easily reelected if he had shown in just the slightest bit of leadership.
If he'd even pretended to be doing anything,
Yeah.
like
Like
Andrew
Cuomo. Yeah,
gave a
Cuomo's
press
a high
conference,
approval
that's all
rating, he's
he
just
needed.
pretending.
But since the election, I don't think he's talked about it at all.
No.
He only cares about I
Stop the
really
steal.
won. It was
Yeah.
the whole thing's a fraud. It's like, what the hell kind of politician is this?
Yeah.
Anyhow, where were we? Hoover.
Yeah,
So imagine if Roosevelt had been another Hoover, which could easily have happened. The fact that you get this man who's extremely energetic, totally fearless, willing to try anything, that you get the right man at the right time, that's kind of extremely fortunate. If you had a second Hoover and everything just continued to tank,
We could have became fascist, right?
or communist or anything. Who
Right.
the hell
Yeah.
knows? It could have become. I mean, anything could have happened. So
let me ask
we are
you-
fortunate in that respect.
Let me ask you this question about that era. So all the elites align against Roosevelt, the cultural elites, the experts, the moneyed, everybody's like, we hate this guy, and the public's like, we love him, and he gets elected and reelected resoundingly. Do you think that elites have consolidated power to the point in this country where that would actually be impossible? So,
It's happening right now, though.
right.
I'm sorry, I
Go ahead.
misunderstood.
No.
I misunderstood.
No, so what I mean is, look, with Trump, he's able to get elected. He has this, somewhat grassroots base, but he also has an elite plutocratic agenda and consent and support and
Yes.
enabling from an elite class. So he's able
Cut
to get
taxes.
cut tax, deregulation, all
Yeah.
of this stuff. They get their judges. They got exactly what they wanted out of the deal. So you have an elite class that supports him. Whereas if you look at like a left-wing movement like the Sanders movement, you only have the grassroots base and you have zero elite support, and you have 100% elite antagonism, are they just too powerful to overcome at this point, or is it still possible?
Ooh, look, I try to be a hopeful person about things like this. The Sanders movement was really inspiring. We can sit around and talk about what they did wrong. I don't really want to get into that. There'll be another Bernie Sanders. This movement, I should say, let's talk about, first, let me acknowledge the downside of this. The elites are together in this country. We've talked about this already. The elites are together in this country right now in a way that we've never seen before. With, Biden outraised and outspent Trump by a considerable amount. So did Hillary Clinton. Republican areas all over America, the affluent Republican areas, are shifting over to the Democratic Party. You've been seeing the reports of traditional Republican donors cutting off Republican politicians.
Yes.
This is incredible.
All these corporations, right?
And in some ways, look, nobody likes to see Republicans go down more than me.
More than all of us.
This is in some ways, this is great. But you're also seeing a coming together of the elites, a gathering of the elite tribes like we have never seen before in our lives. And that's scary. Okay, to get back to being hopeful about the future. Let's see, why am I hopeful about the future? Oh, yes. I'm older than you guys. I'm 55. I started the Baffler magazine in 1988. All those years that I was doing that, we were alone. I mean, our ideas were extremely unpopular. I was at the Wall Street Journal when Obama became president, and I was the odd man out, believe me. And I've always, my entire career has been, predicated on the assumption that I am basically all by myself. Well, not anymore.
Not anymore.
I mean, you look around, there's all of these people, movements on the left are growing and building, and the support for Bernie is incredible. This is a man, I interviewed him in 2014, maybe it was 15. It was before he declared his candidacy for the presidency. And everybody just assumed, well, this guy's a crank. He's going to run a kind of Ralph Nader campaign, And look what he did.
Look what he did.
It's fantastic. Better than I could have ever thought possible. His message is clearly resonating. It's wonderful. And so I am very hopeful about that these ideas are catching on, and they're all over the place now. And I'm very positive about that.
So do you think that there will be, as we just described, there's this elite consolidation behind the Democratic Party. Do you see a Republican civil war now happening?
Oh,
the Trumpists versus the establishment types?
Yes, but in some ways it's already happened. It's at some point, do you think Mitt Romney will actually switch parties?
That's a good question, right? I mean, he doesn't have the base of support in the Republican Party.
Yeah, well, he's
anymore.
not running for president again, so
yeah.
But so maybe he won't. But I think that it's a Trumpist party now. Now, I don't by saying that, I don't mean that a member of Trump's family or some of these people who really discredited themselves in the last couple of weeks are going to be the nominee next time around. What I mean is, Trumpism did not start with Trump. It started with Nixon. Or you can go back further than that, but it's basically this. It's what we were describing earlier, coming up with non-economic ways to speak to people's economic grievances. The culture wars are the preeminent example, but racism helps out there too. And they have all sorts of weapons in their in their mixed metaphor here. Weapons in their arsenal. Yes, I was about to say toolbox. Yeah. That's not where you keep your weapons. But Trumpism is older than Trump, and it will outlast Trump. Trump just took it a few steps further, both in his extreme demagoguery, and the vulgar language, and then also the very interesting thing that he brought to the table was the genuine economic hints of economic populism, especially around the trade agreements,
issues,
which then he did very, very little to advance.
Right.
I mean, those towns that were suffering, they're still suffering.
Yes.
Those people that were screwed, they're still screwed. I mean, the only thing he did really to help those people out, he didn't do, which is he had a booming economy. and you started to see wage growth before COVID.
Right.
And now that's all gone, and then some.
Yeah, that's all gone. So,
Yeah. He only has 30% left, though. That's the interesting part.
Oh,
is that
this
his approval-
last move, this was a disaster for him.
disaster.
Just
So
incredible.
he probably can't run in 2024 now, right?
I mean,
you think he'd run?
destroyed
No,
his
I don't.
vice
I was more worried about one of his kids running, or
I don't think they have his talent. I really do think he's talented in a very specific way. I think he knows how to read a crowd and rile them up.
Are you? I'm always. He fascinates me because on
Me
the
too,
one hand,
yeah.
he's so stupid.
You know,
And yet he has a certain
I'll tell you his
gift.
trick. His trick is he's punchy when he talks. It's very quick, abbreviated sentences. It lands, it lands, it lands, it lands. And it's a way of speaking where anybody could sort, because he was made fun of for talking at like a 6th grade or 5th grade level or whatever it was. I remember reading
Yeah.
articles about that.
No, that's not when I say he's stupid. What I mean is that like he couldn't figure out to be a leader during COVID.
Yeah,
Right.
he's a dumbass. I agree with that.
And you know, he goes around insulting huge parts of the electorate. Remember
Yes.
calling Mexicans rapists and murderers?
Right.
Yeah.
What?
Right.
Yeah.
What kind of politician does that?
Saying it's only
Right.
old people who die of COVID. It's
Oh
only
my
old people.
God.
Don't worry about it. It's
or,
okay.
or making fun of handicapped people. Do you remember
I
that?
do remember that with
That
the
one
reporter.
blew my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
Like what politician does that?
But you know,
have
the best thing about him is what you were saying about Rose. This goes back to your point about Roosevelt. Is the best thing about him is the people that hate him. Like that is actually the appeal of Trumpism is like all of these people that I fucking despise
I hate who you
this
hate.
guy, and now
Yeah.
I love him.
Yep.
I mean that's the
And
whole
by the way,
thing.
Democrats can't figure this out.
No.
Have you ever looked up what people actually think of Hollywood?
Right, exactly.
Democrats
exactly.
think
They're like,
if,
let's
if
get
you go to their
evil
conventions,
Longoria.
if you go to their conventions, they bring these people out one after another. And it's like everybody loves a Hollywood star, right? It's like, no.
I do think there's truth to that narrative of like there's a lot of political correctness, and so whoever stands up and says, I don't agree with the political correctness, people are like, I'm with this person. You know what I mean? And that's a simplistic narrative, and it's brought up way too much to cover everything. But there is an element of truth in that, and I think that explains
That's
a lot
right.
of Trump's appeal.
Yep. The vulgarity, I have a different theory, which is that he's an excellent performer, and so he was out there giving speeches in 2015, 2016, and when he would get a reaction from the audience, he would put a mental check mark and repeat that.
That's right.
And then finally that would become like the trade agreements. If you go back and look at his speeches, that was his main theme.
That's his main theme.
By the end.
In the right states, too, where he was campaigning.
And it's like, well, how did that happen,
Yeah.
Because the audiences would roar when he talked about that.
Yeah.
And so he figured out that needs to be my thing. And just trial and error, some kind of...
Yeah. Chomsky made a good point. He said that what Trump does that's genuinely skillful is he knows how to sort of appease the people who are lower income and make up his base while also simultaneously appeasing the corporate interests that helped fund his campaign and that he served with the tax cuts and the deregulation. And that's not an easy thing to do.
That's
Because
George W. Bush also, that's Ronald Reagan. That's
right, yeah.
That's all of them.
the
That's
move.
Newt Gingrich. That is the trick to being a Republican.
Yeah.
Is remember George Bush Sr. is the one that always makes me laugh because he was such an aristocrat.
Zero
So
charisma.
bad.
Yeah, terrible.
But he went around the country in 1988 eating pork rinds,
Oh, my God.
conspicuously eating pork rinds, and hanging around with country singers and touring flag factories. Do you remember this?
Yeah, well-
That's ridiculous.
Oh, my God.
And then the Democrats give him this perfect opponent. Michael Dukakis is like, it's not about ideology, it's about competence. And I'm the
Amazing.
greatest technocrat that the world has ever seen.
John Kerry versus W. Same thing.
It's the same
thing.
thing.
Same thing.
We always walk right into the
can't
trap.
help it.
Always. Not we, the Democratic
Right.
Party.
Yeah, the Democrats.
Always walks right into the trap.
So if
Hillary Clinton, same deal.
elites are now wholesale abandoning the Republican Party, at least making a big show of it. And I do think that it's going to be harder for fundraising. It's going to be harder for those who want to go back to the country club or get their corporate deal after they're out of office. I think that life is going to be harder for them in their, prospective career path and what they were planning to do. So if you have continued elite consolidations you've been talking about in the Democratic Party, does that mean that you ultimately do have more and more working class people, white, brown, and black, drifting over to the Republican Republican Party like we saw this time around.
Well, look, this was something that I wrote in years ago in What's the Matter with Kansas, that this kind of phony populism, this appeal to class grievances without talking about economics, that this is powerful. Especially in the absence of anything else, especially if the Democrats aren't giving you the real deal, which they aren't. That this will eventually migrate. I mean, by that time, it had already gone from, there used to be I guess you'd say, a demographic group before, back in the 70s, they were called, the term of art back then was the white ethnics, and they had been a part of the Roosevelt coalition, the New Deal coalition, and in the 1970s they shifted to the Republican Party. And this basically is what I was thinking when I wrote this, is that basically eventually this will happen. What you just described will eventually happen, that these kind of culture war appeals will eventually spill over into groups other than what we now call the white working class, and you will see other groups being roped in. Now, I did not think that it would happen while Trump was the leader of the Republican Party, because he's such an asshole.
Right.
He's such a bigot.
Right.
I didn't think that it would happen, but I thought it would happen eventually. But it was my great surprise. Then the election just concluded. Well, you saw the Latino voters in Texas and Florida, all over the country, shifting dramatically to the Republican Party. That's really interesting. If that continues, that's going to change the map.
And where do you think that does come from?
Oh, I'm sure it's. Look, I don't know. I haven't been to those places. It's COVID time. I haven't interviewed anybody, and I don't do that sort of thing anymore.
I read it might have been the checks. Remember when they sent out the first round of stimulus checks and I had Trump's name on it?
And that worked. Well, that's
Latino voters would get the check and it'd say Donald J. Trump on it.
Yeah,
and you
now
go,
just imagine
okay.
if he'd actually been a real leader during COVID. That might have been. Look, that's just simple retail politics there.
Exactly. Yeah.
He just did the right thing.
Yeah.
For
right.
once.
Mm-hmm.
But look, there's no reason why it wouldn't eventually happen. And this is the fallacy. And remind me, I want to talk about the group that's going the other way, that's going to the Democratic Party, because these are the people that I grew up amongst. But this is the great fallacy of the Democratic Party strategy. And you know what the strategy is. They call it the coalition of the ascendant, meaning, all of these different demographic groups that are growing in numbers rather than shrinking. And they're becoming democratic. And so the Democratic Party says, look, we don't have to do anything. We got it in the bag. We're eventually, if we wait long enough, we'll be unstoppable. Mm-hmm. So we don't have to do anything. We don't have to serve anybody. We don't have to, do anything for anybody, except for, of course, the professional elite who they love and adore and will do no end of favors for.
Yeah.
But we don't have to do anything for these groups that are coming our way.
Except say we're not racist.
Yeah, well, call the other side names. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But
we're not bigots. Vote for us.
Yeah, and that's that's kind of true.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
it's true.
Better than
it's
the other
just,
people's
nothing.
pitch, which is
Yeah.
we are racist. Vote for us.
But the
It's an
idea of
anti-pitch.
not actually delivering
Yes,
anything to these
it's
people. And
an
by the way, and this
anti-pitch.
is a subject that is coming up more and more and more. Do you remember? In this last election, and you saw this rant from Ice Cube, the rapper.
Yes.
Did you see that?
It was
I thought
great.
that was awesome.
It was awesome. Yeah.
But he making this point. It's like, well, what have you done for us?
Yeah.
What are you actually
Give me
going to
something
do
tangible.
other than beating Trump? Come on. What else you got? Mm-hmm. Which is a totally normal question. But the Democratic plan is literally to take people for granted. Remember the sort of unofficial motto of Clintonism in the 90s? Where have they got to go?
Yep.
Where else are they going to go?
You got no other choice. Yep.
And so what that's the Democratic strategy. What it leaves out, because these guys are really bad at chess, what it leaves out is, what's the other player going to do? He's not just going to sit there and let this happen to him.
Right. Yeah.
He's going to come up with something.
Right.
We don't know what, but Trump just showed you what it is.
Right.
Which is reach out to the white working class who are already on their way into the Republican Party, but accelerate that, the what's the matter with Kansas phenomenon. Push that along, and next it'll be other groups. Of course it will. There's no question about it. But they're dynamic. They're going to be reaching out. They're going to be doing everything they can to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Right. I feel like good news might be, though, that Trump may have taken it a bridge too far into like conspiracy territory, where it's like
he's
the other aspects of the message are totally overshadowed by what just happened. You know what I mean? Like the economic stuff. I think in his 2020 run, he wasn't anywhere near as economically populous sounding as he was in 2016.
That's right. But can I just throw something out there, like a digression? Hasn't it been a relief for the last week to realize this guy's done?
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw 29% approval rating right before we came in here. That's what I saw, and I was like, I knew it. So he's going out like Bush. He's going out like Bush.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
I know. That's Bush territory.
I mean, he had it all in hand. If he just kept.
He's
of all,
so bad at the game, though.
If he'd even been remotely of a leader in COVID, like you said, reelected, no problem, running against Biden, who was, let's just say less than ideal candidate.
Barely alive.
So could have easily gotten reelected. And then even after he lost, if he just kept his mouth shut, he had his post-presidency, could have made tons of money, could have played the will he or won't he game for 4 years about if he's going to run for president.
Had to.
Now he's got no friends.
Now, no friends. He may have to declare bankruptcy. This guy may end up in prison.
Deutsche
It's
Bank
all
abandoned him.
gone
Just
like
got
that.
because he encouraged a little riot.
Right.
When all the corporate interests are like, sorry, man, we're done. We know you cut our taxes. We know you deregulated,
Yeah.
but we can't do it.
Well,
And
they
he's like,
don't
oh,
need him
shucks.
anymore.
You're done. You know, what else are you going to do for me? It looks like nothing, so see
ya.
you later.
Yeah.
All he had to do was not do this, and he would have been fine.
I mean,
But he did this.
We were
What a doofus.
We were both chuckling about how the thing that he was most upset about was the PGA
Yes.
pulling the championship.
He was most
but
upset about
actually,
that.
it's kind of real because, like, when the elites are officially pulling
Yes.
their support, and you're screwed without that. He's totally screwed without that.
Do you think he's going to go to jail with the New York?
Oh, come on! I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't do any of that sort of thing. But just to go back to his folly as a politician.
Yeah.
And so in the one sense, like we said earlier, he was able to beat Hillary Clinton in 2016 when she outraised him by 2-1 and had the best advisors in the world, had everything going for her, and he managed to beat her, and it is amazing. And he also beat Jeb Bush, and he beat all those other guys. It is amazing.
Yeah.
But you look at this last campaign, the Democrats choose Joe Biden during the great year of Black Lives Matter, and Trump can't figure out how to It's like, wait a minute, you just chose the guy who's responsible for destroying the lives of one of probably your single most important group of demographic support, and Trump can't figure out how to turn that against him.
Right.
Wait. It gets better because Trump would contradict himself instantly when he would campaign. Yeah, in the same sentence, because he would attack him for being too hard on crime with the crime bill, but then he would immediately attack him as too soft on crime. You got to pick one.
But that's very Republican to say contradictory things in the same sentence.
Yes.
I kind of admire that.
He'd be like, he funded the police too much, but he's going to defund the police.
But
You're like, wait, what?
he couldn't make the sale. The thing is that because he doesn't understand it. He doesn't have any problem with the crime bill of '94. So he couldn't figure out why someone might be against that, and he couldn't couldn't show empathy, couldn't understand that. And I'm sitting there saying, oh my God, this is Biden is totally exposed on this, totally vulnerable, and the dude can't figure out how to drive it home. So we got lucky.
He's half alive and he won. I mean, the fact, listen, COVID really was
nice.
the thing.
We're all thinking nice things about Joe Biden right now.
COVID was
it's
the
gonna
thing.
Be great
we're
to have a
cheering
real
for
president.
Oh yeah.
I'm very excited.
He just
Restore
needed to
the
stay
soul
home.
of America,
Shut up,
Thomas.
Mr. Frank. I need to. I don't want to go down the Obama hole that I went down in 2008, where I was all full of hope.
We all were to some extent.
Yeah.
But Biden just needed to stay home and shut up, and then Trump self-destructed. That's it.
That's all. That was the whole
That
scheme.
and COVID, and you go, oh my God, let's go with the guy who didn't fuck this up royally. That's the idea.
That was it.
I heard
that was
that,
the
Kyle.
whole.
The FCC heard that. The Attorney
They're
General
coming
heard
for
that. Okay, so now here's the other side of the coin. So I grew up in the sort of white flight suburbs of Kansas City. They're not in Missouri. They're in Kansas. It's called Johnson County, Kansas. We were not a wealthy family, but we grew up around some of the richest people in America, that lived in that area. Very, very affluent part of the city, part of the state. This is the ruling class of Kansas City. This is the ruling class of the state of Kansas. They run the place. Okay, and when I was a kid, I wrote What's the Matter with Kansas largely about these people. These were the most Republican people in the world. these people had voted for every Republican to come down the pike since like Taft, right? The only one, so Woodrow Wilson was the last time Johnson County went for a Democrat, and then it was rural. It wasn't part of the city then. But these were extremely Republican people, of course. That's what Republicans were.
Right.
The ruling class. They own the place, right? And they have their country clubs, and that's about it.
Right.
This area, by the way, is called the Country Club District.
Oh, geez, that's too perfect.
I am not kidding.
That's too perfect.
I know. Anyhow, Biden took it. For the first time since Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, won this area. And I went back, I went into the data the other day. And in the neighborhood that I grew up in, the ruling class of the city, the ruling class of the state, Biden won every precinct. Every single one in that little part of Johnson County. And it blows my mind. And everywhere you went in my neighborhood where I went out there for election day, of course, right? It's an annual ritual. And everywhere you went were these, Black Lives Matter signs and those yard signs saying respect science and, all of this stuff. And it's incredible. And this is the ruling class changing sides. We are seeing it before our eyes. And it is absolutely fascinating. I mean, the most Republican people in America. And now it's like, the working class people in Wichita. That's who votes for Trump. There's more of them. Trump still won the state because there's more of them. And then farmers, of course.
Right, yeah.
There's more of them than there are of. But it's a complete inversion of the way things have always been. So like Kansas went for Roosevelt. Kansas went for Lyndon Johnson. Johnson County didn't. My area didn't. They went for Goldwater. They went for, Landon or whoever the hell it was,
Right.
But the rest of Kansas, but now it's completely flipped. All those people, the sweating, toiling masses of the state went for Trump, and the owners went for Biden. It's absolutely
mind-boggling.
Anyhow, this is the future. This is where we're going.
So, and this will be my final question for you, then I'll turn it over to Krystil. But what's the best way to get workers' interests back into the mainstream of American politics? Is it through some third-party route, or is it through unions getting more involved? Is it through some sort of general strike? Like, what's your view on that?
I sounded like my own father when I made that noise.
I'm like mine too.
I'm sorry. I hate getting old. It absolutely sucks. I think, look, one of the things that needs to happen, it's a catch-22 situation because the obvious answer is unions. You need to, you want to trigger a kind of 1930s scenario, let people form unions again in this country. And most of your viewers probably don't know this story, but one of the reasons that the Democratic Party is so weak and is changing before our eyes is that unions have been they're no longer, when I was a kid, that's what the Democratic Party was. It was the party of organized labor. Everybody knew this. It was obvious. And today they aren't. And unions are very, very weak. They're down to less than, it's like 7% of the private sector, something like that.
It's 6 or 7%.
And that's because of the way the laws in this country are enforced. It's basically, you try to organize a union in the workplace, boss fires you. That's it. And that's against the law, but the law is toothless. And so employers have figured out that it's extremely easy to get rid of unions, to prevent people from starting new ones. And as a result, they are no longer an important, force in American life. And with the results that we talked about before, extreme inequality, the rise of this culture war, all of these terrible things are a result of that, ultimately. How do you change that? It's easy. You change the law, you put teeth in the law, you enforce the law, and people can start forming unions again, and they will change the face of this country. They will bring about more economic equality by themselves and also through politics. They'll do all the things that would be healthful, and it would be a good thing. Unfortunately, for that to happen, people in Washington have to let it happen.
Right.
They have to pass legislation. They have to start enforcing the law, etc. So that has to happen first. And the question is, will they do it? And it was on the table when Obama was elected.
Card check, right?
Yep. And Obama was like, sorry,
He did like a perfunctory, I tried.
Yeah, I did my best. See you later, guys.
Yeah.
And that's that. And it was, and the unions have tried with each Democratic president as soon as they're elected. So Bill Clinton, they tried something similar. Jimmy Carter, they tried something similar right at the beginning of the administration. And each time they were rebuffed, not just by Republicans, for whom they are the mortal foe, but by Democrats who refuse to lift a finger for them because the Democratic Party doesn't believe in that anymore. So it's a very, very tricky situation. It's a kind of catch-22, but I think that's the obvious answer. If you were able to get them up and running again and they became a force, it would completely change the complexion of this society.
Do you think that there's reason to be hopeful there with Biden? Because he is this, I think he genuinely sees himself as like working class Joe, in spite of all of his, or middle class Joe, I guess, in spite of all of his
the famous
terrible track record.
Yeah.
And he came up during a time in politics when unions were still the Democratic Party and having to be comfortable in the union hall and speak that language and understand at least that side of politics.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to force you to be hopeful, but is there any reason to believe maybe he would have more sympathy to that direction of the country than Obama did ultimately?
I think so. I hope so. But I don't know. Look, a lot of unions really thought he was their guy. And they, this is the face-off between him and Bernie.
Right.
And both of them were very pro-labor. Bernie actually has the track record.
Yes.
Right.
Biden's track record is not as good. But there are union leaders who really think he is going to go to bat for them. Now, we're all going to find out. I don't know the answer to whether he will or not, but there are certainly a lot of people who think he's going to, and exactly what you just described, middle class Joe, all that stuff. I am not hopeful about it because if you watch their convention, they almost never talked about it.
There was no labor.
So I'm older than you guys. I've watched a lot of conventions in my time, and the Democrats, it wasn't just labor, it was that term that you used earlier, middle class. They used to love this term. And they open up the Democratic convention, they immediately start talking about it. You know, we are the party of the middle class. We're about building the middle class. We're blah, 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 on and on and on. And this goes way back, and they always did this up until very recently here. If you watch their convention this year, they never said it. Or if they did, I missed it. They never talked about it. What they wanted you to know was that they were the party of diversity. And that they drove that home in this really unmistakable way.
The Black Lives Matter blocks behind Elizabeth Warren.
Trump even tried to do that. There was diversity was a big thing at the Republicans.
Of course, right. He had all those NFL players and stuff like that. But then you go to the Republican convention, and the very first speaker, right out of the gate, is like, "We are the party of the working class."
Yeah.
Or something like. I mean,
they had nurses speak. They had workers and small business owners.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but it's all bullshit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But they said it.
Yeah.
And they get some kind of prize for that.
And you can do people. Yeah. For sure.
I mean, when at least they're saying it, I guess, is from the public perspective, from the public perception, at least they're saying the words working class and middle class. I mean, I guess, where do you think that things go from here? Like, how do you think the Republican Party cracks up? Do you think that elites sort of break off from that in a sort of rump group and maybe form their own third party? Do you think Trumpism totally takes over the Republican Party? Do you think Democrats just continue down the neoliberal path? What do you see in the trends in terms of the direction we're heading in? Two
possible scenarios. One, Biden succeeds as president, and Biden basically cures COVID, and Biden gets the economy roaring again, and Biden is a hero, and it inaugurates a new era of Democratic Party dominance. Okay, that's the rosy scenario. Okay,
color me skeptical.
Exactly. Now let's talk about what will probably happen is that Biden will trip up over his own reservations, Republican obstruction, of course, but also he'll be unable to overcome forces in his own party, or he doesn't want to. It'll be like Obama. Did a lot of things Obama could have done that he didn't do. It's because he didn't want to.
Right.
And and let's say Biden is basically the same way. And so he delivers half measures in all things. It's another Obama term. Nothing happens. You remember in 2014 and 15, just nothing. Did nothing. It was absolutely maddening, and that goes on. And yes, the business interests go back, or like the business interests that are aligned with the Republican Party go back to the Republican Party. So big oil. Who else do they have? Big coal.
Yeah. Basically, the energy sector
well,
is
Sheldon
hanging.
Adelson just died. He's an industry unto himself.
They've got the
So-
My Pillow CEO.
The what?
The
My Pillow guy,
CEO.
yeah. Big job creator, that pillow man.
Yeah, I was going to say the casino industry, but it's actually just that one guy,
Yeah.
Sheldon
Adelson.
Adelson. But let's say that business makes its way back. That Trump, once Trump is out of the picture, they mend their fences. They come back into the Republican Party, and you get a kind of Ted Cruz figure or a Marco Rubio figure who combines the Trumpist culture war stuff. By the way, they understand what we were talking about earlier, that you run against the media,
Right.
that is the sweet spot. They get that,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so but they're also smart. These are intelligent guys. They know how to be a politician. They know you don't go around insulting like the biggest demographic groups in America. You don't go down your list of American ethnic groups insulting them. Well, they know you don't do that. You flatter them. You do that. Anyhow, you get somebody like that who's competent, who's running, and say Biden has got very, very little done. Yeah, you're going to have a fight on your hands. And look, if nothing happens, and we don't start reversing inequality, and we don't start like what I was describing in upstate New York or out in Kansas or in Missouri, small town Missouri, anywhere that I've gone in the last couple of years, and you just see these once vibrant, productive parts of America turned into a wasteland.
Yeah.
If we don't start reversing that, we're in huge trouble in this country.
Yeah.
Not just because those people are suffering and those people's lives suck. That's terrible. But if the only alternative presented to them is the party of professional elites who worship globalization and the internet, or this, culture war assholes, who just want to speak to your bitterness and your frustration, we're in huge trouble.
Yeah.
And I strongly suspect that is the way we're going, because ultimately I'm kind of a pessimist, and I think that's where we're headed.
All
But
the
let's
indications.
hope that Biden hits a home run.
All the indications.
From your
are
lips
that
to
is
God's
right.
ears.
No,
sir.
the 78-year-old steps up to the plate.
and becomes a totally different politician than he's been his entire career.
Yeah. It could
You
happen.
never know.
It could happen.
He's just trying to survive, literally.
You never know. In
what he's doing.
theory, it's possible. The book is fantastic. The People, no, the N-O. It's phenomenal.
the
Everyone should
people? No.
Yeah, there you go.
And
That's how
also,
you say it.
I also just want to say, What's the Matter with Kansas? Everybody should buy that book as well, and everybody should buy
Listen
Listen
Liberal.
Liberal. These are wonderful books. What's the Matter with Kansas was one of the first political books I read, and so there's a special place for you in my heart. You helped my political
thank you, sir.
evolution.
That was very
So
kind.
Wait, I have one last short question, which is, what were the books like for us? I think both your books have been incredibly formative. What were a book or a couple books that were really formative for you?
Oh, well, there's well, let's talk about authors. I mean, I read people from long ago. That's my,
Okay.
so I read those populist books and stuff from the 1890s. But of contemporary people, I mean, he's gone now. There was a historian called Christopher Lasch that I really admired. And this is a guy, he got a lot of things wrong. He was often, making big mistakes. But in the big picture stuff, he could see what nobody else could. And we didn't get into this, the sort of academic part of the people. It's not academic. It's very interesting.
It is
it's
very the whole
about
book is.
professional history and how the historical discipline has changed. And the big bad guy in my current book is a man called Richard Hofstadter, who was the greatest American historian of the 50s. Christopher Lasch was his protege, and sort of picked up where Hofstadter left off, and then realized, it's like, wait a second, he got everything wrong. And Lasch wrote this wonderful book about Clintonism. It was one of the first times, he was one of the first people on the left to turn against Clinton and to develop a whole theory of Clinton. It was called Revolt of the Elites.
All right.
And he was sort of my hero when I was younger. Yeah, him, Studs Terkel, a bunch of other guys.
Studs Terkel's amazing.
I love Studs Terkel.
Fantastic. Thank you. So great to have you. We really
This was
appreciate
a blast.
this was
it.
fun.
We enjoyed it.
Thank
You guys drained me. I'm like, now I'm going to go faint.
Well, thanks for joining us.
We enjoyed
appreciate
it, so thank you.
You are welcome.